Your little startup, she giggled, swirling the last of her champagne. He's really convinced he's the next Jobs or Musk. There it was. The line. The jab. Delivered with a gleam in her eye, and just enough charm to make it sound like a joke. It wasn't. Not to him. Across the white linen table, the VP she was buttering up gave a polite, tight-lipped chuckle. Her boss, a man in custom Italian tailoring, nodded vaguely, clearly distracted by the flambéed dessert being wheeled in. No one said anything outright cruel. They didn't need to. The tone was enough. They looked at him the way you look at the Uber driver who shows up in a scratched-up Corolla when you were expecting a black Escalade. He raised his glass slightly, just a tilt, smiled like he hadn't heard it, and clinked it with hers. To scaling, he said flatly. His tone didn't even try to match hers. But that wasn't the moment everything changed. That came later, quietly. In the car ride home, she rattled on about how the evening went. Who complimented her deck, who wanted samples of the new fragrance line, how the VP's wife looked a little tighter in the face. Maybe work done? She never asked how he was feeling. She didn't notice that he wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the blurred lights outside the passenger window, watching each one pass like data points in a long pattern. He wasn't angry. Anger burns fast, loud. This was colder, cleaner. The kind of clarity that comes when you stop hoping someone will treat you better and start engineering the outcome you deserve. By the time they pulled into the driveway, her voice had faded into the background. He stepped out, didn't wait for her, didn't offer a hand, or even hold the door. Just walked inside and disappeared into the guest room, muttering something about an early Zoom call with Singapore. Of course, he didn't have one. What he did have was a manila folder, one she hadn't seen in years, tucked in the back of his desk drawer. Inside was a name she wouldn't remember, Alan Price. Retired. Discreet. Former mergers and acquisitions attorney, now living semi-off-grid in upstate Vermont. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, but Alan owed him a favor. A big one. While she sipped organic tea in the kitchen and posted, "What a night," selfies on her story, he sat in the dark guest room, scrolling through his company's back-end metrics. Month-over-month retention was up. Enterprise contracts were finally moving past the pipeline phase. Most importantly, cash flow was strong, very strong. Enough to make real moves. He stared at the numbers, then at the champagne stain still on his blazer's sleeve. That line she dropped at dinner? It wouldn't age well. And by the way, if you're enjoying this so far, consider subscribing. Over 90% of people listen without hitting that button. It motivates the team behind these stories to keep pushing harder. Thanks. She always treated his work like a hobby. Something to tolerate. A phase he was lucky to indulge in while she paid for the nicer things. He never argued. He never reminded her that the down payment on this house came from a single seed round he landed 6 years ago. He never mentioned that her new Benz was paid for with stock options he didn't even bother to cash in. Because he was playing the long game. And the long game just got shorter. That night, after she went to bed, he texted Alan 3 words. Time to talk. Then he powered off his phone and opened a secure laptop he hadn't used in months. A VPN activated. 3 tabs opened. He didn't sleep. He calculated. Tomorrow, she'd go to work and pitch her little bottles of bottled air to a room full of European distributors. Tomorrow, she'd brag about profit margins and rebrandings and influencer collaborations. Tomorrow, she'd still believe she was untouchable. But tonight, she became a case study. He looked at the framed photo on the nightstand, some charity gala from years ago, where she was beaming and he looked like her prop. He turned it face down. She liked theatrics. Fine. Let her enjoy the show. She didn't notice right away. Not the shift in tone, not the measured coldness replacing his usual calm. To her, he was still the agreeable partner who carried her coat at events and chuckled when her boss made lazy jokes about real breadwinners. So when he moved into the guest room, claiming early calls with Singapore and loud keyboard tapping keeping you up, she nodded absently, grateful for the extra closet space. She never questioned the change because she never thought he'd change. But behind the door of that guest room, a different kind of storm was brewing. There were no Zoom calls with Singapore. There were encrypted emails. Contacts reawakened. Conversations that began with, "So, remember that idea I mentioned 5 years ago?" and ended with, "Let's talk over secure line." And then, there was Alan Price. She remembered him vaguely, an older man who once visited their old apartment when they first got married. At the time, she thought he was one of her husband's college professors. He wasn't. He was the reason her husband even knew what a change of control clause was at age 25. A man with quiet connections, an encyclopedic knowledge of hostile takeovers, and, Most importantly, a deep appreciation for discretion. They hadn't spoken in years. But when her husband sent that 3-word text, "Time to talk," Alan responded within the hour. They met 2 days later at a nondescript diner just off the interstate, the kind of place with vinyl booths and stale coffee that made everyone forget they had conversations there. "You're sure about this?" Alan asked. "Her company's vulnerable," he said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "She just doesn't know it yet." The thumb drive contained more than balance sheets or stock trends. It contained blueprints, holding companies registered in Delaware, funnel structures through Luxembourg, a list of distressed parent entities tied, quietly, to her employer. None of them bore his startup's name. That was the point. Meanwhile, back home, she was more radiant than ever. Confident, smirking as she leaned across their kitchen island, casually mentioning that her team had locked in an influencer partnership that would put the entire quarter on autopilot. "That's great," he murmured, slicing into his avocado like he hadn't just finished routing a capital injection through a Cayman-based fund. She never asked about his business anymore. She assumed if it was worth talking about, he'd brag. He never did. That was the difference between them. She needed to win the room. He needed to own it. That week, she flew to Paris for what she called a flagship restructuring session, which, as far as he could tell, meant expensive dinners with Italian designers and talking about brand DNA. She sent him selfies from the airport lounge, blowing kisses, captioned, "Miss me already, CEO?" Winking face. He didn't reply. She assumed he was busy with his little startup. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that while she played corporate queen on a rented throne, he was working with a private team of analysts to dissect her company's parent portfolio. The real owners. Not the fancy people in suits who did product launches on Instagram, but the bloodless financial machinery underneath it all. He found the soft spot quickly. It was a diversified conglomerate 2 layers up the chain, one that had overextended itself on a disastrous green energy acquisition. Quietly bleeding. Desperate for liquidity. Perfect. He leaned back in his chair that night, glancing at her empty seat at the dinner table. He stared at the single-place setting. A candle flickered. Not for her. For focus. Then he opened the secure chat window and typed, "Begin phase 2." And just like that, the quiet separation between them became more than just sleeping in different rooms. She thought they were just having a rough patch. He knew they were at war. She was in Berlin that week, standing under blinding lights on a showroom floor that smelled like citrus and sales desperation. Somewhere between describing midnight floral notes and nodding along to a Belgian buyer's dull questions about SKU limitations, she posted a boomerang to her story, her smiling with a branded champagne flute. Caption, "When the CEO hustles and heals nail polish." Back home, he was 30 minutes deep into a due diligence call with a boutique investment firm specializing in distressed portfolios. He wasn't in a suit. He wasn't pitching anything. He was buying. "We traced their majority stake," the voice on the speakerphone said, muffled slightly by bad signal. "A holding company called Parallax One, registered in Dublin, but bankrolled through 3 layers of VC debt, most of it floating rate." "Exposure?" he asked. "They're underwater. Leveraged to hell after a wind turbine fiasco in Brazil. They've got 2 quarters, maybe, before they start offloading anything they can." And there it was. The artery. Her company, the one that flew her around the world, gave her stock options she bragged about at dinner parties, let her pretend she was shaping global beauty trends, wasn't even self-owned. It was a decorative vase sitting on a shaky shelf in someone else's closet. He leaned back and nodded once. "Let's position ourselves." Of course, he couldn't buy it directly. That would have been theatrical and stupid. No, this needed to be cleaner. Untraceable. So he did what every man with foresight and a liquidity surplus should do. He built a temporary ghost. A limited partnership in the Caymans. 2 shell holding structures registered in Cyprus. A buyer name that sounded like a fintech startup out of Zurich. All paperwork processed through a legal firm whose founding partners hadn't given a single press interview in 20 years. 3 weeks later, that ghost made a proposal to Parallax One. A quiet, non-binding letter of interest. It offered solvency, minimal disruption, and, most importantly, a tight NDA clause. Parallax's board didn't blink. They couldn't afford to. Meanwhile, she FaceTimed him from a hotel suite in Milan, lounging in a robe with champagne in one hand and a Korean sheet mask on. "God, I'm exhausted. These distributors are like children." "You're doing great," he said, watching a document labeled Board Proxy Pathway, Class B voting, render on his screen. She winked. "I don't know how you stay glued to those spreadsheets all day. I'd lose my mind." Different wiring, I guess, he smiled. By then, the fake Zurich firm had already acquired a minority stake in one of the other brands under her company's parent. It was a test balloon, a small move, just enough to fly under radar. And no one questioned it. Because to them, he was still the quiet husband of the glamorous executive, a guy with a little startup, probably juggling interns and waiting for his Series B. They didn't know that Series B had already closed 9 months ago, that his ARR was crossing into territory normally reserved for mid-cap companies, that he'd been building his infrastructure not for speed, but for control. He wasn't here to chase valuation. He was here to own the boardroom. That same week, she presented a seasonal campaign to her CMO. Think ancient femininity meets digital minimalism, she said, gesturing at slides full of abstract flowers and QR codes. The room nodded, scribbled notes. Someone said genius. Back at home, her husband forwarded a draft document titled Trigger Clauses, Subsidiary Reorg Scenarios. He didn't need to understand fragrance. He understood leverage. They always saw him as the man in her shadow. He was just waiting for the sun to shift. At first, it was little things. A canceled off-site retreat. A freeze on travel reimbursements unless pre-approved. Her junior team grumbled, but she brushed it off. Every company tightens the belt sometimes. But then came the Slack message. Q3 expansion plan deferred. All campaign launches paused pending board review. She stared at it. Reread it. No explanation. No context. Just a flat command. She scrolled up, hoping it was some kind of error. But then her calendar lit up. 3 planning meetings gone. Replaced with cryptic placeholders like strategic hold review and budget optimization sync. Something was off. She stormed into her CMO's office, arms folded. Is this a joke? We spent 4 months building that campaign deck. Our projections were green across the board. Why pull the plug now? The CMO, usually slick, charming, always caffeinated, looked dulled. It came from higher up, he muttered, eyes flicking to the frosted glass wall like someone might be listening. Boards shifting priorities. We're not supposed to ask too many questions. Shifting to what? She snapped. This is my division. You don't just shelve an entire product line without explanation. I don't know what to tell you, he said, voice low. They're being vague. Whole company's on ice right now. I heard rumors, he trailed off. That night at home, she tried to vent over wine. She'd poured herself a glass, kicked off her heels, and stood barefoot in their kitchen, arms gesturing wildly. I swear, it's like these investors think they can just override leadership. They're not even here, but they're pulling strings like they own the place. Outsiders playing CEO. He didn't look up from his laptop. Market's brutal lately, he said. VCs are tightening across the board. She scoffed. These aren't just VCs. Someone's behind this. Someone with intent. You don't pause a fragrance rollout in 12 markets unless there's a serious internal power play. Maybe they're just cleaning house, he offered mildly, scrolling through an acquisition document marked Final Reorg Structure. Internal, eyes only. She poured another glass, oblivious. Over the next week, the cracks widened. Emails stopped flowing through the normal chain. Her assistant quietly asked if she should pause hiring efforts. A supplier emailed her directly, confused why their contract was flagged for reevaluation. Then came the kicker. A board-wide memo, and signed, announcing temporary consolidation of executive decision-making pending legal review of updated shareholder structure. She stared at it for a full minute, heart stalling, then slammed her laptop shut and called her old mentor on the board. Tell me what the hell is going on, she snapped. A pause, a deep breath on the other end. Then, there's movement. That's all I can say. Movement? What kind of? I can't talk over the phone, he said quickly. But listen, whoever's behind this isn't random. They know things. Contracts, personalities, friction points. It's surgical. Surgical. That word stuck with her. She hung up and paced their living room, barefoot, pacing hard enough to shake the floorboards. Meanwhile, upstairs, he was running simulations. Not for his startup. For her board. For the timing of when to leak a certain licensing error that, by contract, would accelerate a control shift. Downstairs, she cursed a name she didn't know yet. Upstairs, he finalized a timestamp notice that would land like a scalpel. And when she came upstairs later that night, feigning interest in his day, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and whispering, "Want to take a break?" He didn't flinch. "Can't. Crunch time," he said. She pouted. "Boring," she teased, trailing a finger down his arm. "My little tech mogul." He smiled. Just enough. And clicked send. It was close to 8:30 p.m. when her phone rang, the kind of hour where board members usually don't call, unless something was burning. She was lounging in her home office, legs curled under her on the designer armchair she insisted they buy because it completed the room. A silk robe, jazz playing low, a glass of wine that had been refilled twice already. The name on the screen made her sit up straighter. Don Morgan. He wasn't just a board member. He was her guy, her backstage hand. The man who once pulled her name out of a list of forgettable candidates and said, "No, her. She's got something." He'd never questioned her, never raised his voice, always guided from the shadows. She answered on the second ring. "Dawn? Everything okay?" A long breath. "There's been movement. More movement. Jesus. Are you all allergic to specifics now?" she snapped. "It's a buyout," he said plainly. "Majority stake. Quiet. Calculated. They're not broadcasting yet, but they're consolidating positions aggressively. And fast." She blinked. "Who?" "That's the thing," he said. "No one knows. They're using multiple shells. It's clean, quiet. Legal team's brutal. But here's what's weird," he paused. "Spit it out. They're incredibly well-versed in our internal architecture. Contracts. Personnel quirks. Past vendor disputes. Like someone walked them through the maze with a flashlight. Stuff we've never released." That silenced her. "You're sure it's not just another fund phishing?" "No. Hedge funds don't drill into who had friction with the regional VP in 21 or which clause in the Milan lease is exploitable. These people are methodical, purposeful." Her grip on the phone tightened. "You think it's someone inside?" "I think it's someone who had a guide. Someone who knew exactly where to press." She stood up slowly, eyes scanning her office as if it suddenly had ears. "So what does that mean for us?" "It means we're probably past the halfway mark. And no one on the board is talking resistance. They're talking transition." "Transition to what?" she snapped. "To new ownership." She didn't respond. On the other end, Don added gently, "I wanted you to hear it from me before the formal notice goes out. You'll be briefed soon. But brace yourself." Click. She stared at her reflection in the window. Her robe, her wine, her empire, built on brand launches and breathless presentations and being the smartest, shrewdest woman in the room, suddenly felt like a set on a stage about to be torn down. She stormed into the kitchen, poured herself another drink with shaking hands, and yanked open her laptop. Slack was dead quiet. Email had 2 flagged memos she hadn't read yet, both from legal. Both titled advisory only. She opened the first. Legalese. Cold. Detached. But one phrase hit like ice water. "In the event of a controlling interest acquisition, all current divisional heads will submit transitional reports to the incoming entity's integration officer." Integration officer. Incoming entity. She slammed the laptop shut. "Unreal," she whispered. "Just unreal." Upstairs, she found him in the guest room again. Shirt sleeves rolled, calmly typing. "Anything exciting?" she asked, voice too light. "Trying to finalize a partner handoff," he said, without looking up. "One of our regional guys got poached. Whole transition's messy." She nodded. "Corporate world's insane right now. Everything's moving under the table. Tell me about it." She watched him for a second longer. The way he didn't flinch. The focus in his eyes. The stillness. He wasn't built like her boss. Or her VPs. Or her polished boardroom allies. But something about him, in that moment, made her uneasy. And for the first time since the first investor memo hit her inbox, her confidence cracked. Just slightly. Just enough to let the cold in. It was framed as a win. The kind of quick, flashy maneuver that senior execs love to slide into Q3 earnings calls to distract from stagnant numbers. A fresh licensing deal with a growing Chinese distributor. High-margin territory. Fast rollout. Guaranteed press. She pushed it through with barely a glance at the deeper legal vetting. "We need the boost," she told her CMO, who looked uneasy. "They're a new player, but the terms are solid. We close this, and our regional numbers spike before the board meets." The CMO hesitated. "Did legal finish their review? I heard there was a question about." "Don't stall," she snapped. "We've wasted 3 weeks on internal second-guessing. This deal makes the quarter." And with that, she signed. Digital ink. Timestamped. Deal done. What she didn't realize was that by approving the contract, she had tripped a wire months in the making. A clause, buried deep in an exclusivity agreement with a European partner, prohibited third-party fragrance licensing in the APAC region without express written consent. That clause had sat dormant for years. Forgotten. Until his legal team unearthed it, documented it, and quietly waited. It wasn't negligence. It was bait. He'd known how she operated. Always in a rush to look bold. Dismissive of second opinions. Addicted to being the hero. So they laid the trap in plain sight. The Chinese distributor? Real, but incentivized through intermediaries connected to one of his Cayman arms. Their eagerness? Scripted. The timing? Coordinated down to the press cycle. The contract? Crafted to appear clean but written in a way that, once signed, would automatically activate 3 separate breach conditions across her company's existing licensing agreements. 1 domino, 3 cracks. And in the legal world, a breach, even if unintentional, is leverage. That night, she came home glowing. Closed the deal today, she announced as she kicked off her heels, pouring herself a celebratory glass. Our Asian markets are about to pop. Watch this turn heads. He looked up from his laptop, expression unreadable. Congrats, he said. Hope they're ready. She laughed. Ready for what? But he was already typing again. Upstairs, his legal team received the green light. Notices were drafted. Escalation letters printed. Quiet alerts sent to the legacy partners her company had neglected for years. One by one, the clauses lit up red. Breach here. Breach there. Violation. And with each one came the right to invoke penalty terms. Right to review board composition. Right to halt expansion. Right to demand integration oversight. In legal terms, it was a surgical strike. In corporate terms, it was an internal coup with a smiling face. Within 48 hours, her inbox filled with follow-up required emails from legal, compliance, and the general counsel. She didn't panic yet. She fired back curt responses. We're reviewing it. Not material. Will be resolved in-house. But then her CFO stopped by her office, visibly shaken. We may need to convene a special board session, he said, barely meeting her eyes. There are ownership-level implications. From a licensing error? She scoffed. It's more than that, he said. The triggers, they're systemic. We're exposed. That word, exposed, hung in the air. She didn't respond. Just stared out the window of her corner office, watching as rain streaked down the glass. In another building across the city, her husband watched the same weather. Sipped his coffee. Clicked through the real-time notifications. Clause 7, A activated. Clause 14.3, be notified. Clause 9, see breach acknowledged. He leaned back, watching the cascade of red banners populate the internal dashboard. All legal. All clean. All final. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just waited. Because he knew what came next. Her company had just pulled its own foundation loose. And handed him the keys. She barely made it through the revolving glass doors before her phone pinged. Subject, urgent, board meeting at 9:30 a.m. From, board chair. Sent, 6:14 a.m. She read it 3 times. No agenda. No context. No prep packet. Just a sterile line at the bottom. Attendance mandatory. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than usual. The quiet hum. The cold metal. Her reflection staring back at her. Calm. Professional. Rattled just beneath the skin. She tried to rationalize. Maybe it was just fallout from the licensing mess. Maybe legal needed face time to do damage control. Maybe someone overreacted. But the moment she stepped into the boardroom, she knew. Something was gone. The energy. The familiarity. The room was the same, but the people were not. 6 new faces around the table. Crisp suits. Impeccable grooming. No name badges. No laptops open. Just stillness. Watching. Her CFO was already seated, sweating. Not visibly. Not like in a courtroom drama. But you could see it in the way he adjusted his collar, the way his pen tapped the same spot on his legal pad over and over. Her CMO wasn't there. HR was. Standing in the corner like a statue, arms folded, expression unreadable. Good morning, she said cautiously, setting her bag down, trying not to let the click of her heels betray the tremor in her gut. I wasn't given any materials. We'll get right to it, said one of the new men at the head of the table. He had a voice like gravel and a Rolex that gleamed with quiet aggression. There has been a shift in controlling interest, he continued. Per our revised cap table, majority ownership has changed hands as of this morning. She blinked. Wait, what? You'll be reporting to new ownership, effective immediately. The words dropped like bricks. Her heart hammered. Her mind raced. This is ridiculous. I sit on that board. I have rights. We don't just. Who are you people? The man folded his hands. We are your board now. Her CFO flinched. HR shifted, stepped half a foot forward. We'll discuss your transitional responsibilities shortly, another added. They'll be joining us in a moment. She laughed, a little too loudly. Joining us? Who? Some fund manager who thinks fragrances are scalable SaaS. No one responded. She turned to her CFO. What the hell is going on? He still wouldn't look at her. Just stared at the wood grain of the table, as if hoping it would open and swallow him whole. The man with the Rolex continued. As of this morning, all department heads are to submit transitional briefs. Your current title remains, but your decision-making authority is suspended until further integration. This is absurd. Illegal. You can't just walk in and... A quiet ding. The elevator. Footsteps in the hallway. The door opened, and for a moment, the entire room stopped breathing. Her eyes darted toward the figure entering, slow, composed, adjusting his watch as if walking into a casual meeting. And then her mouth parted slightly. No sound, no protest, because standing there, clipboard in hand, flanked by two silent advisors, was him. Her husband. Her quiet, invisible husband. The man she had dismissed, ignored, belittled for years. He didn't say a word. He walked to the head of the table, nodded at the Rolex man, then at HR, opened a folder, laid it flat, and said, "Let's begin with integration plans." She sat frozen, blood drained from her face, and all she could do was stare, because the only sound louder than the chaos in her mind was the silence in that boardroom. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. Her lips parted slightly, instinctively, like she was about to speak, but nothing came. He walked in like he'd been there 1,000 times before. Calm, silent, his movements unhurried. No grand announcement, no dramatic flourish, just a small, almost imperceptible adjustment of his watch as he stepped over the threshold and into the room she thought she ruled. Her husband, her harmless, hoodie-wearing, behind-the-scenes startup husband. Every eye in the room turned toward him, not with curiosity, but recognition, respect. A few board members even straightened in their chairs. One, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, gave a small nod of acknowledgement, as if confirming a private understanding. Don Morgan, her longtime mentor, looked down at his lap. No defense, no warning, no explanation. He didn't even make eye contact with her. He simply walked past her, placed a heavy folder on the polished table, and said in a voice that was cool and precise, "Let's begin with integration plans." The words hit like a slap. Integration plans. Not restructure. Not review. Not discussion. Integration. Her division wasn't being consulted. It was being absorbed. She sat motionless, color draining from her cheeks, hands flat on the arms of her chair to keep them from shaking. A man she'd publicly joked about, mocked in front of clients, brushed off at galas. The man she once introduced as my husband. He's doing a little something in tech. That man now owned her company, and not through some lucky IPO, not via inheritance, but through a slow, precise, calculated dissection of her professional world, performed while she watched reality shows in bed and laughed at tweets about Silicon Valley bros. He opened the folder, began speaking. Terms, conditions, departmental reviews, redline adjustments. Her mind wasn't tracking it. Not fully. The words blurred together. Legal jargon, HR phrasing, corporate-laced formalities that all translated to a single, stunning truth. She wasn't in charge anymore. She wasn't anything anymore. At one point, the HR director leaned down and quietly handed her a tablet. It displayed a summary of transitional duties and reporting structures. Effective immediately, you will report directly to the Chief Technology Officer of the parent entity. She stared at it. Read it again. The CTO. Him. The room kept moving, oblivious to her stillness. Everyone was already adapting. The new normal was being ushered in. Terms accepted, changes noted, action points logged. She was the only one left behind. He finally turned to her, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just neutrally. Your vertical will remain intact through Q4, pending KPIs. We'll review performance at the start of next cycle. Then he turned away. She flinched like she'd been slapped. She wanted to scream. She wanted to flip the table, to accuse him of betrayal, of manipulation, of treason. But what could she say? What accusation could she possibly throw at a man who had broken no laws, raised no voice, and signed every document with sterile legality? What story could she spin to reclaim her dignity in a room full of people who now answered to him? There were no words left, only silence. And in that silence, she realized something far more devastating than defeat. He had never wanted revenge. He wanted precision. And now she was just another bullet point in his integration plan. Her office had never felt so cold. The space, once her sanctuary of scented candles and curated awards, now buzzed with a sterile hum. Even the faint aroma of the lavender diffuser, usually comforting, now smelled fake. Like a cover-up. The envelope sat on her desk like a crime scene. Cream-colored, thick stock, sealed with an embossed logo she didn't recognize at first. But she didn't need to recognize it. She knew. Everyone knew. That logo belonged to the new parent company. And the new parent company belonged to him. Her name was written in careful black script across the front. No title, just her name. She closed the door behind her with slow, mechanical movements, as if expecting it to slam back open and reveal this had all been performance art. Some wild, corporate prank. But the click of the latch behind her only made the silence more suffocating. She peeled the envelope open, hands suddenly unfamiliar to her, clumsy, unsure. Inside, there were 3 things. A letterhead document titled, Executive Reassignment Terms, Integration Phase 1. A non-disclosure and behavioral compliance addendum, standard for transitions, but unusually detailed. A handwritten sticky note. She read the letter first. Effective immediately, you will transition from Executive Vice President, Global Product Strategy to Strategic Advisor, APAC and EMEA, reporting directly to the CTO of the parent entity. She blinked. Reread it. Reporting directly to the CTO. Of course, the addendum was worse. Pages of legally binding terms outlining behavioral expectations, media silence clauses, restrictions on external communications, mandatory integration workshops. Everything she had once approved for lower executives was now shackled to her own ankles. But it was the sticky note that stopped her. Yellow, crooked, for words, written in casual black pen. Not so little anymore. No signature, no wink, just the fact of it. She sat down hard in her chair, staring at the note like it might change if she blinked long enough. But it didn't. She remembered the dinner party where it all started. The champagne, the laughter, the careless lines she threw into the air like confetti. He thinks he's the next Jobs or Musk. She remembered saying it with a grin. She remembered the table chuckling. She remembered looking at him and seeing nothing but silence. And now she sat in a glass box of her own making, holding a document that legally confirmed what everyone else already knew. She no longer held the strings. She was the one being managed. A soft knock at the door broke her trance. Her assistant poked her head in. There's a courier waiting for confirmation of receipt, she said carefully. Do you want me to? She held up the document, gave a small nod. Scan it. Stamp it. Whatever the hell they need. Right away. The door closed again. She let the letter fall to her lap and leaned back. Her eyes trailed to the sleek, minimalist award on the shelf behind her. 2021 Executive of the Year. The plaque gleamed. The irony glared. It had taken him one signature to undo a decade of her curated ascent. And he hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't shamed her publicly. He hadn't needed to. He simply rewrote the ownership. She tried to imagine what the board must think. The whispers behind doors. The sly glances. But then she realized there weren't whispers. There was no scandal. It was all legal. All clean. And all final. She hadn't been betrayed. She'd been outmaneuvered. She didn't want to go. Not really. Every part of her body screamed to slam the door, fake a migraine, vanish behind some vague executive leave. But that knock, gentle, almost apologetic, cut through her hesitation. They're asking for you in the conference room, her assistant said softly, not meeting her eyes. Media's already set up. Media. She stood, smoothed her blouse, checked her reflection, then immediately hated herself for it. The walk down the hall felt like moving through cement. People passed her, but no one stopped. No one asked questions. No one whispered. They just watched. And then she reached the doors. They were already open. Cameras lined one side of the room. Legacy board members stood off to the left, perfectly postured, practice smiles ready. A few held champagne flutes. The new board, his board, stood near the front, shaking hands, ushering greetings, all in that tone of cheerful professionalism that made your skin itch. And in the middle, framed by soft spotlights and a banner bearing the newly minted parent company's name, was him. Her husband. Or rather, the man who used to be her husband. He wasn't looking for her. He was shaking hands, smiling, posing with the CFO, the board chair, even Don, her old mentor, who looked like someone had vacuumed the last bit of dignity from his spine. She hovered at the threshold. One step in. No more. Frozen. Then the CFO stepped up to the mic, voice carrying with that false excitement that always preceded public bloodletting. Thank you all for joining us this morning. It's a historic day for our brand, our future, and our shareholders. As you all know, we've undergone a significant transition these past few weeks. And today, we're honored to officially welcome the founder and new executive chair of our parent firm. The room turned. Flashbulbs popped. She barely heard the name. She didn't need to. Her face cracked, not fully, not in a way anyone could name, but just enough. A micro-expression, shock smothered by professional paralysis. Her lips moved as if to say something. A protest? A denial? But nothing came. And that was when one of the photographers, unaware of the personal carnage unfolding in real time, snapped the shot. She stood there, half-lit, jaw clenched, shoulders stiff, eyes glassy, not in awe, not in fury, but in something deeper, the realization that she'd become the punchline of her own story. The image was captioned later that afternoon by a mid-tier industry blog. CEO realizes she now reports to the man she mocked. It was shared, then reposted, then screenshot with snide comments by startup Twitter and LinkedIn influencers. Play stupid games. Marry quiet, divorce smart. Nothing louder than silent revenge. The post went mildly viral. 500,000 impressions by nightfall. She never addressed it. PR was instructed to say nothing. And he said absolutely nothing. Not a speech. Not a quote. Not a smirk. Just a nod during the press line. A few firm handshakes. And one final look in her direction. Cool. Unreadable. Finished. She stood there, watching the applause, and realized the only sound louder than the cameras was the silence of a man who never needed to raise his voice to win.